To Diep escapes abroad to survive. Must she leave CEO James behind? No one expected her to disappear. The sky was heavy with gray clouds that day, the kind that mirrored the storm brewing into Diep's heart. The girl from the peaceful countryside, once known for selling eggplants at the morning market, now stood at the edge of an airport terminal, her hands trembling as she clutched her passport. Behind her were the remains of a shattered life, a love forged through fire, betrayal, and the weight of secrets too dangerous to stay. Too Diep was running, but not from love, from death. For months, shadows had followed her. It all began when John, James's former business partner turned enemy, discovered her connection to the man he hated most. James had tried to shield her, even faked illness to trap John, recording his confession about drug trafficking and corporate sabotage. But in the game of power and revenge, James had underestimated how far John would go. A whisper on the street, a stranger's glance, a black van parked for too long, every sign reminded to Diep that John's eyes were everywhere. Then came the phone call. A distorted voice warned her to disappear, or James would die. She didn't tell James. He had given too much already. His company on the brink, his health fragile, his soul weighed down by the sins of his father. To Diep loved him more than life, which is why she made the hardest choice, to vanish. A new identity, a flight booked under a fake name, a goodbye never spoken. At the airport, she replayed every memory. The way James smiled when she brought him homemade bangkuan, how his hands trembled when she got dizzy, and the doctor suspected she was pregnant. The sleepless nights he spent trying to rebuild his company, while she stood beside him, refusing to leave. She hadn't told him about the child.
As the boarding gate opened, Too Diep hesitated. Was she strong enough to raise a child in exile? Was it fair to leave James without knowing he was going to be a father? Every step toward the plane felt like betrayal, yet every moment she stayed was a risk to his life. Love, sometimes, meant letting go to protect someone. But destiny has a strange way of not letting go. Unbeknownst to Too Diep, James had been searching for her since the moment he found her necklace left behind on their windowsill. He knew she wouldn't leave without reason. As he traced her steps and followed the faintest clues, he began to uncover the truth, the warning call, the threats, the silent war still being waged behind his back. Will Too Diep stay hidden forever? Can James find her before it's too late? And when their paths finally cross again, will love be enough to heal what time and fear have broken? One thing is certain, even oceans apart, their fates are forever tied by sacrifice, by loyalty, and by the unbreakable bond of two souls who refuse to give up on each other.
Across the ocean, a heart still waits. The plane landed in Oslo under a veil of snowfall. Too Diep had never seen snow before. It blanketed the world in silence, almost like a clean slate. No past, no pain, no James. Just her, and the growing life inside her. She rented a small apartment above a quiet flower shop in a forgotten corner of the city. Every morning, she helped the old florist arrange tulips in the window. Every night, she wrote unsent letters to James, pouring her heart onto paper that would never be mailed. I miss you. I'm sorry. I'm still wearing the ring you left on my pillow. Meanwhile, back in Vietnam, James was unraveling. Days without Too Diep felt like decades. He'd faced corporate collapse, betrayal, and public shame, but nothing tore him apart like waking up to an empty house. No message, no farewell, just her necklace, coiled like a question mark beside the bed. His search began in silence. He didn't tell anyone, not even Toon, his loyal assistant. He hired private investigators, traced transactions, hacked into travel records. Still, she covered her tracks well, too well. Weeks turned into months. His empire continued to crumble, but he didn't care anymore. Then one night, a call came. It was from a florist in Norway, an old woman with trembling hands and broken English. A young girl, Vietnamese, She cries your name in her sleep. James dropped the phone. He was on the next flight out. When do worlds meet again? Diep was placing fresh Lila by the shop window when she felt a familiar chill run through her. She turned slowly. There, standing in the doorway like a ghost from her past, was James. His eyes locked onto hers, her breath caught. The world seemed to fall away. I found you, he said hoarsely. Why didn't you let me protect you? Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could speak. Because they threatened to kill you. I couldn't lose you. You almost did, James whispered, stepping closer. But I won't let you go again. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing. His hand gently touched her belly. He paused. Diep, are you? She nodded. Yes, I was going to tell you, but then I know, he interrupted gently. I know everything now. Love in the time of danger, but peace was short-lived. Back in Vietnam, John had discovered James's trip. He realized James was close to uncovering the rest of his crimes, not just the embezzlement, but the deeper conspiracy behind the drug routes, land theft, and a shadow network stretching far beyond one company. John sent men to Norway. One snowy night, Diep's apartment door was kicked in. James fought. He protected her, but they were outnumbered. In a desperate move, Diep triggered the emergency code James had once taught her. A single tap on the smartwatch he gave her, linked to international security services through his former contacts. The rescue came just in time. John's men were arrested. James was injured, a stab wound to the shoulder. As he lay in the hospital bed, Diep sat beside him, holding his hand and whispering through tears, "You came all this way to find me, even when I left you." James smiled weakly. "I would cross every border, every storm, to hold you again." Epilogue, A New Dawn. 6 months later, they returned to Vietnam. James cleared his name with the evidence gathered from Norway. John was arrested and exposed before the world. The company, though scarred, began to rebuild, not with greed, but with honesty, and with Diep at James's side. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom they named Hope. And though the past had nearly torn them apart, it also taught them something neither of them would forget. Love isn't just about staying together, it's about fighting, even across oceans, to find your way back. Shadows that never sleep. The return to Vietnam should have been peaceful. It wasn't. The media called it a miracle. The fallen CEO and his runaway fiancée coming home stronger than ever, with a child named Hope as the symbol of their rebirth. Newspapers printed smiling photos. Investors slowly regained confidence. The company, once poisoned by corruption, was now blossoming under new leadership. But behind the polished glass of the boardroom, a storm was quietly brewing. One rainy morning, James received a letter, no return address, no handwriting. Just a printed note and a small, aged photograph of his father, standing beside men James had never seen before. "Your father's sins are not yet buried. You've only scratched the surface." Diep found James staring at the photo, his hands trembling. "James," she asked softly, "is everything all right?" He nodded, but his voice was hollow. "They know something about my father. Something I don't." She sat beside him, placing baby Hope gently into his arms. "Then we'll find out, together." The legacy of blood. James began digging into old company records, long-forgotten files buried in archives and basements. Toon helped him trace hidden ownerships and silent partnerships dating back decades, strange names, foreign companies, unexplained land acquisitions. That's when the name Turned Baki resurfaced. A ghost from the war years, Baki had once been the silent backer of James's father. Rumors said he was the real owner of the first land deal that built the family empire. Others whispered darker things, that he'd vanished mysteriously or been betrayed. James's father had never spoken of him. And now, someone claiming to be Baki's son, a powerful businessman named Ki Jr., was making moves. He just bought a major stake in a rival company and made an open declaration at a press conference. Some empires are built on lies, and lies must be paid for, in full. James watched the broadcast in silence. Diep stood behind him, arms crossed over her chest. "Do you think he's coming after you?" James answered with a single word, "No." Then he turned to face her. "He's coming after our daughter." The return of the past, security around their home was tightened. Cameras, guards, and private patrols. Diep stopped going to the market alone. Hope was never left out of sight. But the threat was no longer in the shadows, it was at their doorstep. One evening, a delivery arrived, no return address again. Inside was a baby rattle, exactly like the one Hope had lost 2 weeks ago. And a voice message on a flash drive. "She's beautiful, let's hope she stays safe." Diep collapsed in fear. James held her tightly, rage and panic colliding in his chest. "I'll end this. I won't let her suffer because of what my family did." "But how?" Diep whispered. "They're too powerful, too silent." James's eyes burned with a new fire. "Then we'll burn down the silence." A dangerous alliance. To fight a hidden enemy, James did the unthinkable. He contacted CEO Min. Min, once his rival in both business and love, was now leading a major infrastructure firm. But unlike the corporate snakes, Min still held his code. He never attacked the innocent. "I'm not doing this for you," Min said when James arrived at his villa in the countryside. "I'm doing it for her." He pointed to a photo of Diep on his desk, the one he'd secretly kept. James didn't flinch. "I don't care why. Just help me stop them." The two former rivals shook hands, a dangerous alliance forged in shadows, bound by love for the same woman and the same desire to protect her future. Moral lesson: the price of love, legacy, and truth. The story of Diep and James teaches us that true love is not just about romance. It's about sacrifice, resilience, and choosing to stand beside someone even when the world turns against you. Diep could have left. She could have chosen the easy road, far from fear, far from danger, but she stayed. Because love, at its core, is loyalty in the face of uncertainty. James could have run from the sins of his family, but he chose to confront them, even if it meant risking everything he rebuilt. Because the past only loses power when we stop hiding from it. The story also reminds us that success gained without justice may come back as a curse. Secrets buried by one generation often rise to haunt the next. And lastly, the most powerful lesson: hope is not just a name, it's a choice. A choice to believe that healing is possible, that enemies can become allies, that even when darkness threatens, love can still light the way. The courage to rebuild. Life often tests us through unexpected storms, betrayal, loss, and painful truths. But the journey of Diep and James shows that what defines us is not how we fall, but how we rise again. Diep's strength came not from power or wealth, but from her quiet determination to protect those she loved, even if it meant letting go. Her decision to leave was not weakness, but wisdom. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to return stronger. James learned that being a leader isn't about control, it's about responsibility. He faced the consequences of choices made long before him, but he didn't run. Instead, he chose to rebuild his company, his values, and the trust of those who still believed in him. Their story teaches us that forgiveness is harder than revenge, but far more powerful. Love is not proven in comfort, but in chaos. Legacy isn't inherited, it's earned by the courage to face the truth.